Welcome to JW3 Online. We're so glad that you've tuned in, and if you don't know who we are, JW3 are a one-of-a-kind Jewish community centre in London that's open to everyone. If you want to know more about us, like us on Facebook or YouTube, and check out the rest of our events online. We hope you enjoy the programme. I cannot get over myself kind of seeing me before, and that little jingle and kind of animation is so wonderful. Welcome everybody. Welcome to Denomination, Young JW3's latest series with me, Joe Hyman, as before, and our guest this week, Rabbi Sam Fromson.
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure to be here.
We are a denomination, a nation made up of denominations, and that's something that we want to celebrate. Each week, we're going to bring an emerging Jewish leader to explore their denomination and what they care about. We're going to look into different Jews and different communities to take the stereotypes we may have about them and throw them out the window, because we believe that unity comes from celebrating both our differences and similarities. If you're watching tonight or at any time, then let us know, what denomination do you affiliate with? What community do you feel most comfortable in or not? But let us know. We'd love you to continue the conversation in the social media platforms. But for now, let's talk to Rabbi Sam. Welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
Really good to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before we start, I'm going to throw out kind of, what some people will see as a hard question, some people will see it as an easy question. But let us know, for the crowd, what denomination community do you affiliate with?
Thanks, Joe. So I affiliate with Modern Orthodoxy. I consider myself a Modern Orthodox Jew. And the synagogue that I'm affiliated with, as I'm part of Golders Green United Synagogue. The United Synagogue doesn't define itself as Modern Orthodox, actually. It defines itself as centrist Orthodox. So getting into those fine lines here. So I see myself as a Modern Orthodox rabbi serving a centrist Orthodox community.
Great. So what we'll see in this whole series, and what we've seen previously, is that this question isn't an easy one, and people live in complex spaces. They have their own identities and they sit in different communities, and managing that nuance and that gray area is, I guess, what this series is all about, and kind of communicating that really clearly. But before we jump into kind of the big questions, I want to just hear a little bit about you. How did you become a rabbi? Why did you become a rabbi?
Sure. So my journey into rabbinics starts in probably an unusual place, which is in the world of BBYO. So I was very involved in BBYO as a teenager. I come from a United Synagogue, centrist Orthodox family. My family were Shomer Shabbat, keep kosher, but I never saw myself as in a rabbinic role in any sense, or in a community leadership role. And as a teenager, I never really related to some of the other youth movements that my friends went to, and instead embarked in a journey with BBYO, which I loved. It's a youth movement that is peer-led, Zionist. It's one that I really had a wonderful time being part of. And when I was 16, I had the opportunity to stand for the national executive, being on the leadership council of the youth movement. And the role I gravitated towards was as JZA, Jewish Zionist Awareness Officer. So age 17, I found myself being the Jewish leader of an entire national youth movement. And in fact, my tour hoodie was Sam the Rabbi Fromson. And I think it was there that my journey to the rabbinate really started. I loved running Jewish programming, Jewish education, Shabbat programs on this scale for BBYO. And when I left school, I had this choice to make. Did I go straight to university, or did I want to take some time out and engage more in my Jewish identity before taking that next step in my secular learning? And I chose to study in yeshiva. It wasn't a decision that I'd originally intended to make, but I decided that I wanted to go and really learn more about my Jewish identity, more about my Jewish texts, and really bring my level of Jewish learning up to some level of parity with my secular education. And I spent 2 wonderful years studying in Jerusalem, in the Old City, in the yeshiva. And it was a wonderful experience, really enlightening, something that I felt I had a deep understanding and a relationship with the Jewish texts and philosophy and ethics that sits at the heart of what makes us Jews. And after that, I took up my place in university, went to Cambridge, and even during that period, never really expected that I would take a rabbinic route. This was my third year. I got married and married Hadassah, who it's always a good idea to marry a woman who's much more religious than you are.
Retroactive Mazel Tov.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And Hadassah and I decided that we wanted to take our Jewish learning a bit further. And I went back after university to spend a bit more time studying, intended initially just to deepen my learning more, but realized that I could take rabbinic exams and it was a path that was open to me. And so I took rabbinic exams and started training as part of Yeshiva University. And it was an incredible experience. My understanding of halacha deepened, community leadership, public speaking, all those elements that really come together in the rabbinate. And when I came back to England, I felt this desire to get involved in the Jewish community and desire to help and to put these skills that I'd learned and this learning that I'd undergone to community use. I started my career professionally working in asset management in finance, not initially in rabbinics, but after 2 or 3 years, realized that I felt something missing. And whilst it was professionally satisfying in some way working in the city, it wasn't the sum total of what I wanted to achieve. So I sought out a job that provided me a bit more flexibility and started looking for part-time rabbinic roles. And that was where the job in Dunstan Road came from. And they were looking for a part-time community rabbi, and Hadassah and I applied for it. And so for the last 5 years, I've been balancing. At the moment, I'm running a startup. So I'm the chief operating officer and co-founder of an insurance startup called YuLife. And at the same time, I'm community rabbi in Dunstan Road alongside my wife Hadassah. We run community programs, education, officiate at life cycle events. And thank God I feel very blessed to have that balance in my life between 2 spheres I'm really passionate about, between working in the professional world, but also being able to be involved in the community, educating, teaching, and leading.
Amazing. So you went from Sam, the Rabbi Fromson on tour, to the Rabbi Sam Fromson now. Really, really interesting to hear a bit about how you got here. What we're going to do now is what we do at every single denomination kind of episode. It's the Denomination Minute. We're going to give you 60 seconds because I think it's important for everyone to see what the denomination actually stands for, what the modern orthodoxy that you speak about, kind of what it means to people who don't know necessarily what that is.
Great.
So what we're going to do is we're going to put a real life timer up on the screen, and we're going to give you 60 seconds. And if the exercise bike behind you says anything, then I'm sure that you'll be really, really good at kind of timing this interval. So really, really ready. Let's get the timer up on screen, and I will give you a go.
Sure. So to me, modern orthodoxy is living life as a Jew who embraces the beauty and the complexity of the modern world and engagement in wider society, whilst also adhering faithfully to the principles, the beliefs, and the traditions of Jewish law and observance. And I think a core principle of modern orthodoxy is that Judaism is enriched by its intersection with the outside world, and also interacting with the outside world gives us the opportunity to fulfill that divine mandate that we have of tikkun olam, perfecting the world and transforming the world to benefit humanity.
And you've got 20 seconds to spare. That is incredibly impressive. Thank you. So what I got from that was this involvement in the outside world, this respect for the outside world, this faithfulness to the tradition, and utilizing that relationship to impact the outside world as well as our interior kind of Jewish community.
And I would say that it's a delicate balance, right? It's not simple because engaging in that dichotomy has challenges, and it causes conflict and internal conflict, and that's something that isn't easy to navigate. But I believe engaging in that conflict is what makes us human, and ignoring it is to our detriment.
Really, really fascinating, and I'm intrigued as to the name, kind of modern orthodoxy, specifically, I guess the orthodoxy element.
Sure.
Where does that come from? What does orthodox mean for those who don't know what that means? And where did the denomination, in the kind of form that it is now, where did it come from? What's its history?
Yeah, it's a great question. So orthodoxy means a fidelity, being an orthodox tradition, something that is a fidelity to tradition and to the beliefs and principles of Jewish law. Where did it come from is a great question, and you'll have lots of different answers to it. Some would say that this is a tradition that stretches back to the times of, the Rambam, Maimonides, even to the times of the sages of the Talmud, who were engaged in professional work, engaged in society, yet at the same time deeply entrenched in Jewish law and tradition. You had sages of the Talmud who were emissaries to the court of Rome, emissaries to the court of Greece, and at the same time deeply entrenched in Jewish law and observance, and carrying on that tradition through Maimonides, who was a doctor, a wise man, a sage, and at the same time one of the foremost proponents and one of the foremost expositors of Jewish law. In fact, even to this day, his teachings still are resonant. But in its current form, I'd say modern orthodoxy was really born in America in the early 20th century, when there was that stark challenge that these new immigrants had of how to engage with modern culture, whilst at the same time keeping true to their Jewish traditions and Jewish values. And there was a couple of schools of thought that grew up around this. Principally one of them, which is where I studied, which is Yeshiva University. And they became, within the English-speaking world, I think one of the foremost proponents of this idea of Torah Umada, Torah, of this fidelity to Jewish law, halacha, ethics, morality, and at the same time, Mada, science, wider engagement with the outside world, believing that there is wisdom and knowledge and beauty in the things that we can learn from secular society and from secular wisdom, and trying to intertwine the two, engage with the two, and fundamentally how to navigate those moments of conflict and how to navigate those moments of complexity, which happen in our every single day of our life.
A really rich history, and I love hearing about those rabbis from the Roman era or from Talmudic times that had these kind of double lives in terms of professions outside of the Jewish community, but also very much they were.
I would pull you up on that, because I don't think it's a double life.
Or not double life. Yeah, no, that was
one life, and that's really the root of it. Because if you can hold that dichotomy within you, but it still be unified, it still come out as one Judaism, one person. I, for myself, live that, so to speak. You could see it as a double life. I'm a rabbi, I'm an entrepreneur, I run a startup, I'm in a community. But to me, I see it all as one, and I see those things coming together, enriching one another symbiotically, though not without its challenges.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you picking me up on that, because I think it highlighted that desire for integration and putting that together as kind of one person integrated with both values.
Yeah.
Let's hear a little bit about kind of what does one have to observe or believe to be part of your community? Are there limits, and what are those limits?
That's a great question. Throughout history, Judaism has been a religion of fundamentally of practice, and there are a wide variety of different attempts that have been made over time to codify what does it mean to be an Orthodox Jew. And perhaps most famous of those is Maimonides, who came out with principles of faith. But it wasn't always an intrinsically Jewish endeavor to delineate principles of faith. Really, we're a religion of practice, and clearly, Rahman al-Libabai, God wants our heart, God wants our soul, God wants us to feel and believe in our religious mandate and in our connection to him. But to say that there is a highly prescribed set of beliefs is something that I really struggle with. I do believe that it can be different for different people. I think there's a couple of fundamental principles that everyone buys into as part of the modern Orthodox framework, which is the idea that God does exist. There is a God who is involved in our lives, who is involved in the world. God has given us a means through which to understand what God wants from us, and that means is the Torah, and the Torah is a divine document. It's an entity that has rich secrets and rich ideas as to how to go about living our lives, what God wants from us in our day-to-day interactions. And I think fundamentally, if those are the two key principles of the existence of God and a belief that the Torah is divine, and then the rest, to some extent, is commentary around it.
Brilliant. So what I want to do now is take us into the kind of the practical realm. We've spoken about what one needs to believe or maybe observe to be part of the modern Orthodox community, but our viewers maybe a bit lost at this stage, maybe be like, oh, I'm not really sure why this is different to what I believe or what I do. So let's take it down to kind of the really practical, common practices that are part of most Jewish communities. So I really want to hear what these look like. The following three kind of practices, traditions look like in your community. And just to let the audience know, if you practice these in a different way, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear. So what they are Shabbat, kashrut, or kind of food rituals, and prayer and synagogue, kind of prayer, synagogue, that type of space as well. And we're aware that those aren't fully exhaustive in terms of what are Jewish practices, but we think that they serve to document the differences between some communities and often also the similarities as well. So let us know what are those different things. So Shabbat first.
Well, there's obviously Shabbat pre-Corona and Shabbat at the moment in lockdown.
Of course, yeah.
But Shabbat, as we'd love to celebrate it, is a time when we come together as a community. It's a time when we gather together on Friday night in shul for tefillah, for Kabbalat Shabbat, singing together, sometimes dancing together, followed by a meal where often we'll have guests around coming to our home. As obviously a community rabbi, we'll often have many guests coming through our home and could easily have 3-4 families, 20-25 people coming to us for Friday night dinner. But my family also makes sure that we only ever entertain for one meal on a Shabbat, and we have time just with our kids, just with our, to give them the attention and love that they need as well to flourish, and listening to their Divrei Torah, and listening to what Ariel's learned in school that week, and just the kind of normal family discussions that sometimes get lost in the rush of the week. Over the course of Shabbat, we won't use technology. We refrain from the Lamed Tet Malachot, the 39 Malachot that define, in Orthodox Jewish perspective, define creative endeavor. So the idea of refraining from Malacha, from creative endeavor on Shabbat, is to focus on being and not becoming, to focus on who we are as individuals and not what we can do, not what we can achieve. And that balance between carving that day out and refraining from those malachot, those types of work, is a beautiful experience, because it stops us from that treadmill of life, and stops us from all those things that you should be doing, and I should be doing this, and I should be doing that, and answering emails and responding to comments and whatever it might be, and just to focus on who we are as individuals, and focus on our relationships with our family and our relationship with God, to daven together in a shul when it's possible, to share meals together, to sing together, to eat together. And that's what Shabbat looks like in my house.
It sounds really beautiful. Let's hear about kosher or food practices in a modern Orthodox world.
Yeah, lots of food, as always. My wife was a wonderful cook, bringing together Gibraltarian, Moroccan, American. Her grandfather was actually a chef. But generally, that's just literally quite local to my house. But, modern Orthodoxy requires a fidelity to halacha. Halacha, defines what is kosher, what's not kosher. There are categories of food that we aren't allowed to eat, that we are allowed to eat. The principle behind those laws, many people give you different ideas. The one that resonates most with me is that, we're supposed to take pleasure from the world. We're supposed to enjoy our food. We're not supposed to be ascetics, living on bread and water atop a mountain. And yet at the same time, we're not supposed to overindulge. We're not supposed to run wild with our senses, run wild with our desires. And so prescribing, these are the types of foods that you can eat, these that you can't eat. When you eat, you have to make a bracha, you make a blessing before you eat, to be mindful, to be thankful to God who created the food that we're eating, and everything that's gone into bringing that food to our table. So, I would keep a strictly kosher diet, and keep those boundaries in my life, and make brachot, make the blessings before I eat, and then the brachot afterwards, and be that birchat hamazon, benching, or whatever brachot are appropriate.
Really interesting to hear about kind of how it looks in terms of limits and not overindulgence. And finally, prayer, synagogue. What do they look like? How often? What's the setup?
Yeah, sure. So, as always, it feels a little bit strange at the moment, but generally I'd be in shul twice a day for shacharit, and then for mincha marav in the evening, and obviously Shabbat, tefillot, where we come together as a community. Obviously, there'll be more people on a Shabbat. Weekday services tend to be a little bit sparsely attended, even in our community. Men and women sit separately for tefillah. The idea that having those separate spaces allows men and women to focus more intently on their tefillah and be able to connect to God in their own way. But we have in Dunstan Road, there's a mechitza everyone's sitting on the ground floor, there's a mechitza down the center. So ladies on one side, gentlemen on the other. The tefillot are always led by men. It's a Orthodox, part of modern Orthodox belief that a minyan is comprised of 10 men to gather together for tefillot, and obviously every single person it's their right and it's their obligation to connect to God and to daven. But for official services, they are ones that are led by men.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's really, really clear. And I think for our viewers, they can now see kind of what modern orthodoxy looks like through these different lenses. And again, I want to remind our audience, if you have different practices that you do in a modern Orthodox shul that's kind of similar or different or outside of that space, then let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you do. So one thing that we like to focus on in Denomination in this series is stereotypes, because we think that it's really important to take them, explain them, and give space to people that may experience that kind of stereotyping within their community, to explain what that does to them, how it makes them feel, but also what they are. So I want to ask you, what's the biggest stereotype people have about someone who is Orthodox or modern Orthodox, and what does that do to you as a human being?
I think it's a great question. I think there's, as with everyone thinks they occupy the middle ground, but to someone who, at least I believe I occupy some kind of middle ground. We've got the stereotypes from the left and the stereotypes from the right. Stereotypes from, let's say, the left is that orthodoxy is something that's blinkered, that's restrictive, that is oppressive, something that creates a closed mindset, a mindset of not interacting with the world, not respecting others who are different. So that's a stereotype on the left, and it's one that I really saddens me. It's something that I try and interact with and engage with. Everyone's got their own different lived experiences as well, and you can never negate someone's own lived experience. If they've had an experience of someone who's Orthodox or modern Orthodox who has treated them in that way, or who has been dismissive of their beliefs, or any of the human frailties and mistakes that people make, then for what it's worth, I apologize. Not that it's for me to do so, or not that it necessarily means anything, but for what it's worth. And I try and live my life in a way that refutes that stereotype. And then also stereotypes from the right, and stereotypes from the more Haredi, ultra-Orthodox world, is that modern Orthodoxy doesn't adhere faithfully to the beliefs and principles of Orthodoxy, of Orthodox Jewish law, of adherence to halakha, of Jewish learning, of Talmud study, and that modern Orthodoxy is kind of Orthodoxy light. And that's also something that pains me very deeply, because I don't believe that there is anything light or diet about modern Orthodoxy in respect or qua ultra-Orthodoxy. I think we have, we engage in that struggle. We engage in that balance, that challenge of what it means to be active in the modern world and respectful and inspired by the modern world. But I don't think that diminishes in any way our halachic credentials. If anything, I think it enhances it. So also in those instances where I interact with people to the right who say, "Oh, isn't modern Orthodoxy just the that second choice compared to ultra-Orthodoxy?" I also try and combat that by showing, to whatever extent I'm able to, mine and my family's fidelity to Jewish law, to halakha, to Torah study, and live that balance in between.
It's really interesting to see stereotypes from both sides of the spectrum in terms of the Jewish community, and I'm interested to see how that affects you personally. Kind of when someone applies a stereotype to you, what does it make you feel?
Yeah, I find it quite entertaining almost, because I'm someone who, when people meet me in a work context, in a professional context, tend not to, unless they've looked me up before, tend not to imagine that I would ever be a rabbi. And ditto, when I'm in shul on Shabbat, there's probably many members of my community who don't know how a life outside the synagogue. Like kids never imagine their teacher has a life outside of school. There's probably members of my community who still don't realize that I run a business and engage in the startup world and a whole different life. So I find it quite entertaining. I enjoy breaking down those stereotypes and giving people what I believe to be an integrated view or what's possible as a modern Orthodox Jew. And for me, it's not something that holds me back. I find it something that inspires me to try and be myself in both of those contexts and bring the values of the amazing values that is our birthright as a Jewish people, those values of tolerance and respect and ethics, and bring those into the business world, and at the same time to bring that dynamism and innovation that can be found in technology and entrepreneurship, and bring that into the Jewish community wherever I'm able to.
That sounds really wonderful, that you take it as an opportunity to educate people about who you really are, and take it as a chance to show some complexity. I also am really interested in what you said about kind of people on the right seeing it as watered down and people on the left seeing it as kind of maybe kind of not open enough. And I wanted to just put out there kind of a thought of my own in context of denomination. One of the reasons that we did this series is because I think so often denominations are seen in a hierarchy in some contexts. Some people see them as a hierarchy with ultra, and I guess in the word ultra orthodox at the top, and more liberal denominations at the bottom. I think it's really important in the context of this to just highlight that in this context, I see kind of denominations as a spectrum of different opportunities to connect with Judaism. And I think it helps me, and when I'm thinking about diluted versions of Judaism, that makes the assumption that I guess there is a authentic best Judaism. And that's just my thought.
That's a very postmodern view of yours. Everything's equal, everything deserves its own right, and I really respect that. That you've got that
Yeah, no, it's
life.
I think
for me, I would take it as more of like a postmodern. I think everyone has a right to that opinion, and I love and respect people from a wide variety of different perspectives who each have their own way of connecting. And even if I don't agree with them, and even if I disagree with what they believe or what they say, I really respect their right to have that opinion. And I think it's amazing that we live in a society and experience a richness of Jewish life that allows different people to express themselves in that way.
Completely, slightly different to me, but nonetheless,
as you'd expect.
We
I'm an Orthodox rabbi. What can I do?
Wonderful. Let's hear some thoughts about what excites you in other communities. So I think in light of talking about stereotypes about your own community, I think it's really important to look to other communities and see what we can learn from them as well. Whether we agree with the full values of that community or not, I think there's always Torah and Jewish values to be learned from a range of different places.
Who is wise, someone who learns from more people. And fundamental to, I think, is modern orthodoxy is that belief that it's your imperative, it's your mandate to learn from more people. So for me, there's so much going on across the spectrum of the Jewish world that blows me away, and something that in our community we're catching up to. For example, environmentalism. That as a value, as a principle, is something that specifically locally in Dunstan Road Shul in Golders Green we have been quite active in pursuing. We're very fortunate to have a chair and an executive board who takes that very, very seriously. But across the wider modern Orthodox world, I think we're sort of at least 3 to 5 years behind some other Jewish denominations in the seriousness with which we're taking that challenge and the importance of it for the future of not just the Jewish community, but of course for the world, and our mandate in promoting that as a value and supporting that with Jewish texts and Jewish study. So that environmentalism is something that I've been awed by the seriousness and the dedication that's given to it across some of the more progressive streams, and how I think it's trickling into the Orthodox community, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years behind. I would say also in that vein, some of the social justice initiatives that the Orthodox community pursues in an internal way. I think there's a very, very well developed social support system that the Orthodox community supports, and that's something that I'm proud of, but also in awe by, and the volunteers that support that. But expanding it to not just members of the Jewish community, to members of the wider world who are in need, and the great work that people like World Jewish Relief doing, and various charities that support refugees. Again, I think the Orthodox community has over the last year or two really stepped up our game to support, and the initiatives that the United Synagogue is running, refugee centres, etc., is brilliant. But these were things that were in place 5 years ago across some other denominations. So I think it's something that we've learned from, and really hopefully are now emulating and being proponents of.
Sounds really interesting, and really kind of heartening to hear that there are kind of these two focus areas that your community and communities like yours are developing and growing and learning from other communities. For anyone that's interested, we recently had a Tu B'Shvat event where we focused on different young Jews talking about what work they were doing towards helping the environment. So if environmentalism is something that our audience is interested in, check out our Facebook or YouTube page for that as well. I've got one final question for you. It's a big one. It's future focused, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yes.
So we've spoken about the history. We've spoken about what your denomination and community looks like now. But when you look to the future, post-COVID, what are the biggest priorities for your denomination? What does the future of the Judaism that you believe in look like in 10 years?
I think there's two big challenges that I would say. One is relevance, and the second is inclusion. I'll speak to the first one first. Relevance, to be honest, across the Jewish world, there's a battle to remain relevant in the minds and the eyes of the next generation. It's not just a challenge faced by orthodoxy. If you look at the rates of assimilation or disengagement from Jewish life across the spectrum, this is one area where the Orthodox community does do well, is remaining relevant to their next generation. But across the modern Orthodox, and I would say, I'm not to speak for any other denomination, but potentially also across other spectrum, maybe to the left of the spectrum of the community, that struggle to remain relevant for our next generation, for our youth, for the generation of people having kids, and why they would choose to give them a Jewish education, to teach them about the principles that are their tradition or their heritage. That's something that we believe passionately in and believe in the importance in. I don't think it's all the same if they have a Jewish education or they don't. I think it's obviously their right to choose, but I think it would be a terrible shame if we let them down by not giving them the opportunity to realize the relevance of Jewish teachings, of Jewish law, of Jewish values, of Jewish ethics to their life. And that has to be manifested in the types of education that we provide. That has to be manifested in the types of experiences that we cultivate. That has to be manifested in the types of leaders that we nurture. And those that mandate of relevance is something that we can't underestimate the challenge of it. Lo alecha hal malacha ligmor. It's not us to complete the work, but it's not we can't desist from the task either. It's something that we have to be constantly working at. And ditto with inclusion. There are people from across the community, across the spectrum of orthodoxy or non-orthodoxy, who don't feel included in the Jewish community, who don't feel like they have the place that they wish to. They don't have, it's not there for them in the way it should be. And that could be from the perspective of women's inclusion in Orthodox services. That could be from people from an LGBTQ plus background who don't feel comfortable in the Orthodoxy. That could be from the perspective of single parents, or that could be from the perspective of young unmarried or middle-aged unmarried who don't feel like the Orthodox community is a welcoming place for them for a variety of societal reasons rather than halakhic ones. Those are societal challenges, and it's something that we also need to battle and need to push to be there for people and remind them that if they choose to, this is a space that wants to have them. Not to say that anyone has to choose to be part of the Orthodox community, but if they do choose to, if it is something that they relate to, then we need to be there for them and be inclusive and constantly working, constantly fighting, constantly challenging ourselves to create opportunities and experiences and education and a framework that is welcoming to all of those individuals. And obviously, if I missed anyone out of that list that we're not inclusive to, then I also apologise. That was off the cuff. But I'm sure there are many more groups that we aren't inclusive to yet that we do need to work towards making space for.
It sounds like a bright future and also a really interesting and wonderful present. I look forward to coming back in 10 years to do Denomination again.
You'll be welcome whenever you come back, Joe.
Who knows where we'll both be. But it'll be really interesting to touch base at that stage and see where all the communities that we speak to are at, what's changed, and what the priorities are in 10 years. But I'm really, really grateful and appreciative to have you today on this program.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's been really, really interesting and really, really clear. I think that's what's important for these programs, is that people can understand and relate and kind of empathize with denominations and communities that they're not part of. We're here every week, Monday at 8:30, and you can check us out on Facebook or YouTube. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you again, Sam, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a great evening, everybody, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you all.